Welcome to our deep dive into William Golding's Lord of the Flies. I think it's safe to say that this is a book that has really stayed with a lot of us, and today we're going to unpack some of its key themes and events together. You're in for a real treat, especially if you're looking for a fresh perspective on this classic.
Oh, it's a novel that rewards revisiting, isn't it? Every time you read it, you uncover new layers of meaning.
Absolutely. So, as a reminder, Lord of the Flies kind of drops us right into the middle of an unspecified war. With a group of British schoolboys who are stranded on a deserted island after their plane crashes. Just picture that for a second. No adults, no rules, just a bunch of kids trying to figure things out on their own. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, as you know, their attempt to build a society sort of crumbles and they descend into savagery. Golding takes us on this chilling journey into the heart of human nature and forces us to confront the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of civilization.
Right, okay. Let's dive into part one, where we see that initial descent from order into chaos. Chapters 1 and 2 set the stage and introduce us to some key players like Ralph and Piggy.
Yes. Ralph, with his charisma and the conch shell, that symbol of order and democracy, he's elected leader. It seems promising at first, doesn't it? This idea of building a new society based on rules and cooperation. But then we have Piggy, the voice of reason, already struggling to be heard. He's constantly trying to ground their decisions in logic, but there's this underlying current of fear and excitement that's pulling the boys in a different direction.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that there are characters like Jack just lurking in the background.
Right.
He's the hunter who craves power, and he's not exactly subtle about challenging Ralph's authority.
Yeah.
Plus, the boys are already spooked by this idea of a beast on the island. It's almost as if the seeds of chaos were planted right from the beginning.
That fear of the unknown, that's crucial, isn't it? Because it plays on their primal instincts, making them susceptible to manipulation and quick to abandon reason. And then, of course, we have that signal fire incident, meant to attract rescuers, but quickly raging out of control, a young boy going missing.
Yeah, talk about foreshadowing.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that even with the best of intentions, things can go wrong very, very quickly. What do you make of that in terms of Golding's message? Is he saying that civilization is inherently fragile? Like we're always teetering on the brink of chaos?
It certainly raises that question, doesn't it? The signal fire. You could see that as a symbol of hope, of their connection to the outside world, but their inability to control it foreshadows the breakdown of order that's to come. It's as if Golding is suggesting that that veneer of civilization is thin, easily shattered by fear and primal urges.
Okay, so moving into chapters 3 and 4, we see those cracks in their little society start to widen. We have Ralph, who is still focused on shelter and survival, but Jack is becoming more and more obsessed with hunting. You can almost feel the tension building between them, can't you? Two very different visions for what this island society should be.
And it's interesting, isn't it, how their priorities kind of reflect deeper aspects of human nature. Ralph represents order, reason, the desire to cling to the rules of the old world. But Jack embodies something more primal, the thrill of the hunt, the allure of power and immediate gratification. It's a conflict we see throughout history playing out on a grand scale.
And then we have Simon, right? He's a bit of an outsider.
Yeah.
Seems to be seeking solitude and seeming to have this deeper understanding of the island, almost a spiritual connection to it. I remember being intrigued by him. Even on my first read, he just seemed different somehow.
Simon represents a different way of seeing, doesn't he? He's attuned to something beyond the immediate, the surface level of things. He seems to sense the darkness that's brewing, but he lacks the language, the ability to articulate it to the others. It's a tragic foreshadowing of what's to come.
And then things take a really dark turn. Jack and his hunters, they paint their faces, embrace this ritualistic killing of a pig. It's like they're shedding their humanity along with those civilized appearances.
That's a powerful image, isn't it? The face paint becomes a mask, hiding their individuality, allowing them to embrace the savagery they're feeling. The hunt itself becomes a ritual, a symbolic act that separates them further from the world they left behind.
And of course, they let the signal fire go out again. They're so caught up in the moment, in the thrill of the hunt, that they completely lose sight of the bigger picture.
It's a crucial moment, isn't it? Because it highlights the dangers of neglecting long-term goals for immediate gratification. They choose to satisfy their hunger, their lust for power, at the expense of their own rescue. It makes you wonder, how often do we make that same mistake in our own lives?
It's a chilling thought. And to top it all off, Jack breaks Piggy's glasses. It seems like a small act of violence, but...
But it's so much more than that, isn't it? Piggy's glasses, they represent intellect, the ability to see clearly, to understand the world through reason and logic. By breaking them, Jack isn't just attacking Piggy, he's attacking the very idea of rational thought. It's a symbolic act of rejecting knowledge, of embracing a world ruled by instinct and brute force.
Wow, you're right. I never thought about it that way before. So as we kind of wrap up this first part, what stands out to you the most about these early chapters? What should we, the listeners, be paying attention to as we continue on this journey?
I think it's important to notice how Golding uses symbolism to foreshadow the breakdown of order. The conch, the signal fire, Piggy's glasses, they all represent the fragile constructs of civilization. Their destruction or misuse mirrors the boy's own descent. He's planting these clues, these warnings, right from the start. He's urging us to pay attention to the subtle ways in which things can fall apart.
That's a great point. It's like he's saying, look closer. This could happen anywhere, even in the most seemingly idyllic settings.
Yeah, it's almost as if the island itself is another character in the story,
Oh,
shaping their behavior, amplifying their fears, pushing them further down this path toward savagery.
absolutely. I think you really get this sense of the island as like a microcosm, this sort of laboratory where Golding is exploring the darkest possibilities of human nature. So in chapters 5 and 6, we see that fear of the beast really kind of explode. Some of the boys are convinced that it comes from the sea, while others think it's lurking in the jungle. Their imaginations are running wild, fueled by isolation and just this lack of any real knowledge about their surroundings.
And it's interesting, isn't it, how that fear manifests differently in each boy. Some of them, like Piggy, cling to logic and reason, desperately trying to explain away the beast as just like a figment of their imagination. But others, like Jack, they kind of seize upon that fear and use it to consolidate their power.
Oh, totally. Jack becomes the protector. He's the warrior who promises to slay the beast. But he's playing on their deepest fears, isn't he? Offering this simplistic solution to a really complex problem. It's a tactic we see all the time throughout history. Leaders exploiting fear to gain control and just manipulate the masses.
Oh, you see it time and time again. And what's so fascinating about this story is how Golding shows us that even the most rational among us can be swayed by fear. Remember Simon? He's the one who tries to tell them that the beast isn't a creature, that it's something inside each of them, something inherent in human nature. But of course, no one listens.
It's tragic because he's really the only one who seems to understand the real nature of the threat. But then things get even weirder when that dead parachutist arrives, drifting onto the island from the war they left behind. You'd think that would be a sign of hope, a reminder that there's a world outside of this island prison.
But instead of seeing it that way, they take this perfectly harmless event and they transform it into further proof that the beast is real. It's like they're projecting all of their fears and anxieties onto this dead soldier, twisting him into a monster that confirms their worst nightmares.
And Jack, doesn't miss a beat. He really capitalizes on this newfound terror, further cementing his role as the strongman, the one who can protect them from this perceived threat.
It's a brilliant but unsettling illustration of how easily fear can be manipulated, how quickly we can just abandon reason in the face of perceived danger. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the role of fear in our own lives? How often do we allow it to kind of cloud our judgment and dictate our actions?
Oh, it's definitely a question worth pondering. And as we move into chapters 7 and 8, the tension between Ralph and Jack really reaches a boiling point. We even see Ralph, the symbol of order and reason, kind of get swept up in the hunt for the first time.
That's a pivotal moment, isn't it? Because even Ralph, who has tried so hard to cling to the rules of civilization, is drawn into this primal energy of the hunt. It reinforces Golding's point that capacity for savagery is within all of us, even those who seem most resistant to it.
It's like a chilling reminder that none of us are immune to these darker impulses, that even the best of intentions can be eroded by fear and the allure of our primal instincts. And then there's that horrifying scene where the boys play that game, pretending to kill another boy. Starts out as innocent fun,
But it quickly escalates, doesn't it? The lines between play and reality just totally blur, and you see this disturbing foreshadowing of the violence to come. It's like Golding is showing us how easily we can become desensitized to violence, how the act of just pretending can pave the way for the real thing.
right. It's chilling to watch them just lose themselves in this mock hunt, to see that bloodlust rise up within them. And then, of course, we have the inevitable split, where Jack forms his own tribe, built on hunting and violence and a complete rejection of the rules and structure that Ralph's been trying to establish.
It's a symbolic division, isn't it? It's like the island itself is splitting in two, reflecting that internal conflict that's raging inside each boy. On one side, you've got Ralph, representing civilization, reason, and the hope of rescue. And on the other, you have Jack, who embodies savagery, primal instinct, and this seductive allure of power without accountability.
It's a classic battle between order and chaos playing out on this tiny island stage. And while all of this is happening, Simon has his encounter with the Lord of the Flies. It's such a pivotal moment in the book, and it's often misunderstood. Can you maybe try to unpack that scene for us a little bit? What's really going on there, and how does it illuminate the central themes of the novel?
Yeah, it's a scene that really demands close attention. Simon has been wandering around in the jungle, and he stumbles upon a pig's head impaled on a stake. This grotesque image, covered in flies and rotting in the sun, becomes the Lord of the Flies, a physical manifestation of the evil that's spreading across the islands. And this figure, this symbol of decay and darkness, speaks to Simon. It tells him that the beast isn't some external monster, that it's something inherent in human nature, something that resides within each of them. It's such a profound and terrifying revelation. But of course, Simon can't share this truth with the others.
Right, because in this tragic turn of events, he stumbles back into the camp, just as the boys are having this frenzied, ritualistic dance. They mistake him for the beast, attack him, and ultimately kill him. It's such a heartbreaking scene, and it really seems to suggest that reason and truth just have no power in the face of fear and mob mentality.
It's such a devastating moment, isn't it? Simon, the one who has seen the truth, who has understood the true nature of the beast, is silenced by the very savagery he's tried to warn them about. It's a brutal reminder of the fragility of innocence and the power of fear to just override reason, and the dark consequences of unchecked primal instincts.
It's a lot to take in, and it really makes you wonder, where do we go from here? What happens to the boys now that they've crossed this line? Now that they've tasted blood and succumbed to their darkest impulses?
Well, that's what we're going to explore in the next part. The descent into savagery continues, and the hope of rescue seems to dwindle with each passing chapter. It gets really intense.
Okay, so we're back, and things are about to get even more intense as we kind of enter this final act of Lord of the Flies. Chapters 9 and 10 are just brutal, especially after Simon's death. You can just feel this darkness closing in on the remaining boys.
Oh, absolutely. That fragile sense of order that Ralph tried to maintain has just completely crumbled. The boys have given themselves over to their primal instincts, and there's this palpable sense of dread that's just hanging over the island.
Yeah, it's like they've crossed this point of no return, haven't they? They've tasted blood, and the violence just becomes a part of them. It's really hard to see any hope of redemption at this point.
And you see that shift reflected in Jack's leadership, don't you? He's no longer just persuasive. He's become a full-on tyrant, ruling through fear and intimidation. He understands the power of symbolism, and he uses it to his advantage. He creates rituals and ceremonies that reinforce his authority and solidify the boys' loyalty to his tribe.
Right, like the feast they have after Simon's death. It's this grotesque celebration of their descent into savagery, this complete abandonment of any moral code that they brought with them from the outside world.
And you can't help but notice the way that Golding contrasts that scene with Ralph and Piggy's reaction to Simon's death. They're consumed by guilt and denial, desperately trying to distance themselves from this horrific act that they witnessed and even participated in. It shows that there's still a flicker of conscience there, but it's being overshadowed by this growing darkness.
And speaking of Piggy, that scene where Jack orders the theft of his glasses. Ugh, it's heartbreaking. And it's not even about fire anymore, is it? It's about stripping Ralph and his few remaining allies of their last connection to reason and intellect.
Exactly. You're right. Piggy's glasses represent clear sight, the ability to see the world through this lens of logic and understanding. And they're also the only way that they can create fire, that essential symbol of civilization, of human ingenuity and progress. By taking them, Jack isn't just stealing a tool, he's extinguishing the last embers of hope for a return to order.
It's such a symbolic act, and it really sets the stage for that final devastating confrontation at Castle Rock. Ralph, Piggy, and the twins, they go there clinging to this, shred of decency, some belief that they can still appeal to Jack's sense of right and wrong.
It's almost painful to read, isn't it? Because it's a futile mission. Jack's completely consumed by his lust for power, and he surrounded himself with these followers who were just as bloodthirsty and unhinged.
And then, of course, we have Roger. He's been this looming presence throughout the whole novel, radiating this quiet but menacing cruelty.
Hmm.
And in that moment when he just deliberately rolls that boulder onto Piggy, it's like all that pent-up darkness just explodes.
It's a moment of just pure, unadulterated evil, isn't it? Piggy, the voice of reason, the embodiment of intellect and compassion, is crushed under the weight of savagery. And as if that wasn't enough, the conch, that fragile symbol of order and democracy, shatters along with Piggy. It's such a powerful image that signifies the complete and utter triumph of chaos.
It's hard to imagine things getting any worse, but then Ralph becomes the hunted. He's completely alone, fleeing through this burning island. And a fire, so ironically, set by Jack's tribe to flush him out. It's like Golding is showing us the absurdity of it all, this self-destructive nature of their descent into savagery.
Yeah, that irony is so crucial. The very act that they think is going to solidify their power, their dominance over the island, ultimately leads to their rescue, or maybe capture is a better word, because the arrival of that naval officer is almost jarring. This sudden intrusion of the adult world, the world of authority and supposed civilization, right into the heart of their island chaos.
And his reaction to the boys is so telling. He's appalled by what he sees, disgusted by their painted faces and their wild behavior, this complete lack of remorse for what they've done. They don't fit his image of proper British boys at all. And he can't reconcile the savagery that he's witnessing with the society that he represents.
It's a really powerful moment of dissonance, and it makes you question whether these boys are really any different from the world that they left behind. I mean, is the naval officer with his tidy uniform and his air of authority really that far removed from the brutality that he encounters on the island? Or is he just a representative of a society that has learned to mask its savagery beneath this veneer of civilization?
That's a chilling thought. And even the boys' reaction to his arrival is so telling. They break down, weeping for Piggy, for the loss of their innocence, for this realization of what they become. But it's too late, isn't it? The damage is done. And the consequences of their actions are going to linger long after they leave the island.
Exactly. Lord of the Flies isn't a story about redemption, it's a cautionary tale. Golding isn't offering any easy answers. He's forcing us to confront the darkness within ourselves, that potential for savagery that we all have. He's reminding us that civilization is fragile. It's just this thin veneer that can be so easily shattered by fear, isolation, and the allure of power.
So after this deep dive into Lord of the Flies, what are we left with? What's the takeaway for us, the listeners, as we reflect on this really dark and powerful story?
Well, I think Golding is leaving us with a challenge. He's asking us to look inward, to really examine our own capacity for darkness, and to consider the ways in which we might be contributing to the savagery that we see playing out in the world around us. He's reminding us that the beast isn't always some external force, that sometimes it lives within us, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge.
That's a powerful message. And it feels so relevant now more than ever. It really makes you think about the choices we make, the leaders we follow, and the responsibility we all have to stand against the forces of darkness, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great place to leave our listeners with that thought, with that challenge to be more mindful, more self-aware, and more committed to building a world where the events of Lord of the Flies remain a cautionary tale and not a reflection of our own reality.
Yeah. Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Lord of the Flies. We hope it's given you a fresh perspective on this classic novel and maybe even inspired some reflection on the state of our own world. Until next time, happy reading.